Those mini lessons will return probably next week. Today I ended up short on time again. The teleconnections remain uninteresting, trending towards neutral. But the Matt and Julian oscillation starting to pull into phase 4, and we should see phase 5 strengthening next week. That usually means dry in the southwest and south, but just kind of a slight correlation there. Very quiet in the tropics, nothing expected for the next 7 days, but on that satellite imagery, we see a lot of Saharan dust, one plume around Puerto Rico, another coming off the African coast. Here's the European aerosols product, which helps track some of that dust. It doesn't appear we're going to see much in the U.S., but it is getting to be that time of the year, and all it takes is a good southeast fetch from the tropics to bring it north. Here's a look at the surface chart late this afternoon. Stagnant across the southeast, mostly dominated by outflow boundary interactions and the sea breeze. Southerly flow through Texas, sea breeze action in East Texas, and a dry line all the way back into New Mexico as the monsoon begins strengthening in that part of the country. Lots of dry air across the southwest into the Great Basin, and a new outbreak of cold air coming into the Dakotas and Montana. And we'll see another strong one coming up for next week. Heading straight to the northeastern U.S., Canadian wildfire smoke across Lake Superior and Ontario. Temperatures this afternoon range from the upper 70s in northern New England to the upper 80s across the rest of the Northeast. And we pick up the obligatory 90s in Virginia and more 90s from Cincinnati westward. As we go further west, storms, and we do have tornado watches across Iowa this afternoon. We pull up the composite radar and you can see a large MCS across eastern Iowa with strong cells out ahead of the line, and those are where we've seen a few tornado warnings this afternoon. Here's a detailed look at the radar with level 2 radar imagery. We did have one cell ahead of the line in far southwestern Wisconsin. This is all Wisconsin, by the way. This tracked from Cuba City to Darlington and had tornado warnings on it. Further south, a classic Boeing MCS right there around Dubuque that had tornado warnings as well, probably due to QLCS type tornado action. And then further down the line, more tornado warnings. This was another cell ahead of the line that had a confirmed tornado over Davenport. I'm not sure if that produced damage. Elsewhere, more of a disorganized structure in southern Iowa, and then further away from the radar, we can pick up other cells, mostly clipping the tops of those cells across Missouri. And so far, we've had one confirmed touchdown near Clarinda in southwestern Iowa. That was about 3:52 p.m. In the southeastern U.S., extensive thunderstorm activity. This is all summer popcorn-type action, combining those outflows and getting these large clusters going. So all the way from Savannah to just about Jackson and Meridian, extensive storm activity. Yeah, this is more of a small MCS surging south into the Everglades, and looks like it may be approaching Miami, Fort Lauderdale. There's a quick look at that activity. It is outflow dominant. No watches or warnings on this, but very likely some torrential rain in some of those cells. Temperatures today mostly in the 90s, with mid-90s from Orlando up to Jacksonville and Savannah. And of course at the Sour, it's been kicked down about 10 or 15 degrees near those thunderstorms. In Texas, we've seen a slow warm-up with mid-90s in most locations, looking at 95 at DFW, 93 at Houston, and 93 at San Antonio. And we pick up 100s in the Pecos River region. Lots of mid-90s through Oklahoma and Kansas. We're expecting 98 at Medicine Lodge. The Storm Prediction Center does have a slight risk of severe storms around the western panhandles and Tucumcari this afternoon and evening due to gusty downburst winds, and numerous flood watches are in effect late tonight Saturday and Sunday across most of Oklahoma into the panhandles due to multiple heavy rounds of precipitation, 1 to 2 inches, and isolated 4-inch amounts are possible. And those extend into northeastern New Mexico for tonight, including Clovis, Tucumcari, and into the Sangre de Cristo Range. Heading into the north-central U.S., you can see that enhanced risk right there around the Quad Cities and into northern Illinois. We've also got a slight risk for that triangle between Denver, Cheyenne, and North Platte. We're expecting an isolated tornado or damaging hailstorm this evening. Flood watches this evening and overnight in northeastern Colorado into the St. Francis and Binkelman area. 2 to 4 inches of rain are possible with multiple rounds of storms over the next 12 hours. And further north, looks like an upper-level low dropping out of Canada, so this is more of a cold core type pattern, and we're seeing some rather cool temperatures, highs in the 70s instead of those 100s earlier this week. Dropping into the southwestern region, it was warm again in the Rockies, 89 for Denver this afternoon, 70s and 80s in the mountain valleys. Crossing to the other side, 98 at Grand Junction, 90 at Salt Lake City. Flood watches, as we mentioned, in the Sangre de Cristos, the Sacramento Mountains of New Mexico, with rapidly surging creeks and streams and debris flows, all of that. The big story, however, is the heat. Some of it seeping into the El Paso area. They're expecting 104 this afternoon and 110 at Phoenix, which is actually a little cooler than what we had earlier this week. All of the Rio Grande Valley down to Las Cruces and Deming, they're under heat advisories for today for temperatures 104 to 108. Heat advisories also in northwestern New Mexico around Farmington, Shiprock to the Four Corners, temperatures up to 100. Arizona seeing an extreme heat warning in the Grand Canyon near the rivers, below 4,000 all weekend. Temperatures up to 115 at Phantom Ranch. It's common for tourists to go in there unprepared, and it is a weekend in the middle of summer, which probably means a lot of trouble. And a few wildfires breaking out. Let's take a closer look at those. And these have been smoldering all afternoon. We've got the White Sage Fire on the Kanab Plateau, the Dragon Bravo Fire near the Grand Canyon North Rim, and this other one up there in Utah. That is the Deer Creek Fire southeast of Moab. Doesn't look like those are near any populated areas. In California, into the Pacific, some mesmerizing patterns out here with the cold current, stratus, and stratocumulus offshore, and some of those bands in there are due to trails from ships. I think that might be one right there. In the interior, however, we have an extreme heat warning for the Shasta Valley westward to the coastal mountains, including Weed and Wairika. 100 to 110 degree temperatures. Redding was expecting 110 today. Heat advisories in the southern San Joaquin Valley, including the North Valley as well. Chico, Redding, Alturas, and the coastal ranges. Temperatures all through those regions could be 95 to 110. And we can't forget Nevada. Central and northwestern Nevada, heat advisories Saturday through midweek. That includes Reno. Temperatures 98 to 105 with overnight lows 68 to 72. Getting a taste of that Texas heat there. And in the northwestern U.S., looks nice, but Portland and the Willamette Valley under a heat advisory for Sunday. Then an extreme heat watch for Tuesday and Wednesday, as temperatures up to 100 will be possible. For today, however, 88 for Portland, 82 for Seattle, Boise, 92 and 87 for Spokane. Pasco, always the hot spot, 95, and also 95 at Lewiston. The Washington interior, the Pendleton, the Dalles area, all under a heat advisory Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And that does extend into Lewiston and central Idaho around Grangeville. Alaska appears to be in good shape, a little bit stormy in the Gulf of Alaska, the Bering Sea, and this big wound-up system out there around Providencia and Anadyr. So let's see exactly what we're looking at. We head out into the Pacific, a strong Pacific high off of California. Then it gets stormy in the Gulf of Alaska with a strong onshore flow into southeastern Alaska and Prince Rupert. Further north, not much going on in Alaska, no watches, warnings, anything like that, but we do pick up this frontal boundary and a very intense wound-up system in the Canadian high Arctic. Some snow coming down. Doesn't show up very well, but there it is from Thule to Grise Fjord and almost to Resolute. Another area of snow showers out around Rhea Point. And you can see some very warm temperatures out ahead of it into the 60s, which is unusual for Baffin Island, but the cold air advection flowing in the wake of that front right there across the Hudson Bay region. And we go out further west. Yeah, look at those temperatures in Canada, 80s all across Labrador. They do have heat warnings across most of the province. I think Labrador might actually be a territory. I'm not sure of that. But 80s also into Newfoundland. And we pick up some cooler temperatures, ironically, down in Nova Scotia. Yeah, I don't want to go over all the advisories. There's tons of them. Want to hit the main ones. There is a storm surge warning for the Tuktoyaktuk area with some unusually strong northerly flow, which will produce a surge of about 3 feet, combining with those high tides. Further south, smoke warnings and smoke advisories have expanded across this entire area of the prairies into Western Ontario. You can check it out yesterday morning on the infrared channel, a couple of hot spots across Saskatchewan and the Flin Flon Thompson area. During the day on the visible imagery, there's those plumes of smoke with that strong westerly flow. Some good storms out there in Ontario and around Winnipeg. That's the overnight hours, and then we get more plumes during the day today. Continued westerly flow. There goes that smoke. So ongoing problems. And a slew of heat warnings throughout the cities of Canada from Sarnia, Windsor, London, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. They are expecting temperatures into the 90s with humidexes as high as 104 Fahrenheit or 40 Celsius. And we take a look at that monsoon chart. There has been some drying up there in the Four Corners region. Albuquerque, the model indicating a 16-degree dew point this afternoon. And actually, we're seeing about 25 there. But look at those dew points around Gallup and Grants as low as -2. That's bone dry. So definitely some dry air involved, and we're going to have to do something with that dry air. Kick it out or advect tropical air back in. So let's see what we're looking at. There's going to be a high off of the west coast right there, putting much of the region under this northerly flow, and that does tend to be dry. That kind of counteracts the monsoon, but there is some moisture coming into West Texas and stubbornly hanging on into the Sierra Madre Occidental. We go into the weekend, and that moisture does manage to build into the Four Corners very gradually. Numerous storms popping up through the El Paso area, southeastern Arizona, and it should increase going into Sunday. Dew points starting to come up near the 50s in Arizona, maybe even near 60, and we should see a pretty good increase through the region Tuesday and Wednesday. So now we're coming up into the upper 50s and maybe even the 60s by Thursday. Looks like a pretty definite monsoon pattern, but July 20th is getting pretty far into the crystal ball territory, so we'll just leave it at that. The model, however, indicating some ridging, which could suppress things a little bit. And the all-important mid-tropospheric flow, progressive flow into Canada. Don't really see any blocking here, just a series of waves. And, vortex, big one across the Canadian Arctic, subtropical high across Southern California, and some indication of one out there in the Bermuda Triangle. All right, let's go through the rest of the sequence. Not really much change through the weekend. The troughs progress west to east. Here's a good one dropping out of Western Canada with this ridge building into the Yukon, northern British Columbia area. This subtropical high remains off of California, and vague raging across the southeastern U.S. for midweek. And this area gets skirted by the trough on Wednesday and Thursday. Oh, this is new, a little upper level low. Where did that come from? Let me back that up. I wonder if that's the remains of a little tropical depression or something. Anyway, there it is, coming up for the following weekend. And then we get this strong upper level high across the deep south for July 19th and 20th. So that promises a much warmer pattern about 7 to 10 days from now. All right, let's take a look at that forecast going into tonight. Cold advection into the northern plains, a series of fronts moving into the Midwest, dragging that precip along with it. Then we get that nocturnal shutdown into the morning, and then things should refire tomorrow afternoon. That'll be more towards the eastern Great Lakes into Indiana, the central Mississippi River Basin, and into Oklahoma as well. And of course, we do have those flash flood watches there for that part of the country. Temperatures much the same around the country as today. Cooler 70s slipping into all of the northern plains as far as the panhandles. Meanwhile, in the northeastern U.S., it gets a little bit hotter with this deep southwesterly flow, looking at 90s appearing at Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Syracuse, even Burlington up to 90 degrees. As we mentioned, thunderstorms all through this area. There is going to be a slight risk of severe storms. That's going to focus mostly on Detroit and Toledo. Looking for scattered high wind reports and isolated tornado as possible. Marginal risk further down the front into the southern plains, West Texas and Oklahoma. Monsoon rains picking up out there in New Mexico and far west Texas. We've got a slight risk of severe storms for West Texas in this area right here due to the possibility of strong convective winds and maybe a little bit of hail. We don't often see those slight risks that far into the Big Bend. Then we go into Sunday. Very slow movement on this front into the Midwest and Northeast. So by afternoon, showers popping up along the Appalachians. We do have a marginal risk of severe storms across the Allegheny region and the northern Appalachians, including the Adirondacks and Poconos. Also an increase in showers and storms in Florida Sunday and Monday. And then going further to the west, more storms for the lower Ohio River Valley to the Ozarks, Arkansas, Oklahoma, even into the DFW area, Lubbock, Midland. So there is a marginal risk for severe in that region. Monsoon continues to strengthen into New Mexico, and we could see that start to advance into eastern Arizona late in the weekend. A big increase in the heat in the Pacific Northwest. By Sunday, we could see 85 at Seattle, 90 at Portland, with low to mid 100s in the Columbia River Basin. Then we go into Monday, the start of the work week, another blast of cold air coming out of the Canadian prairies. We'll start to see a decrease in that sea breeze action in Texas after the weekend, and the monsoon surge continues in New Mexico and eastern Colorado. A small respite from the heat in the northwestern U.S., but that heat will be back at it for Tuesday, up to 87 for Seattle, Portland looking at 93 and 96 for Salem, but fortunately mid-90s in the interior. A massive cool down for Montana, looking at highs in the 50s and 60s for Tuesday. Extensive showers likely from Montana all the way to the Dakotas. Then we'll start to see things heat up from the East Texas area to the deep south, temperatures approaching 100. And then for Wednesday, that cold front tries to creep south. It's not going to make much headway. 60s and 70s to the north of that front. Looks like by Wednesday and Thursday, that monsoon could be building pretty far into Arizona. Maybe some storms around Phoenix and into the deserts. Doesn't look like any sign of that really reaching California just yet. That tends to be more of an August type pattern. And the heat gets worse in the Pacific Northwest for Wednesday. 91 at Seattle, 97 at Portland, and 104 at Medford. Still looking at only mid-90s for the interior. And then by Thursday, we should see that heat wave break. There's the rest of the sequence. Some cold air coming down into Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa, into the rest of the Midwest. Maybe a little bit of a cool down for Chicago and Detroit for next weekend. And that's going to be the very last frame right there. A lot of action up to the north, but rather quiet in the southern U.S. And that's all for this episode of Forecast Lab. I want to thank our newest Patreon supporter, Patricia Houle. She is the first new supporter this month, and it is very much appreciated. All right, hope you all have a great weekend. Take care, and we will see you back here on Monday for the supporters, and on Tuesday for everybody else. Bye-bye.